Well, welcome back to the Pulsatile Podcast, episode two. Back by popular demand is my buddy John Dokken, because we opened the can of worms last time, and a lot of people wanted to hear more about it. I'm sure some don't want to hear about it, but we're going to have to talk about this, and we're going to have to talk about strange things, which I think is what makes um, the podcast important and good. And we can I there are going to be other people that we're going to come on, and other experts and people with different interests, and they're going to get into this. They're going to get into the dimension that we're going to be talking about. The title of this episode is Adrift in a Sea of Sick Chi. Uh, or put another way, Adventures in Sick Chi, which I would describe most of my life. And it's once you gain the understanding that you gain from this practice that was taught to me as Qigong, which I have rebranded as reflective exercise, and then put under the umbrella of autonomic intelligence, and then a company formed around marketing that concept through products, knowledge, programs, and anything else that we can think of that will benefit others, because this practice is nothing but pure benefit. Um, if the only thing you have to lose are a bunch of bad habits, essentially, in order to do it. But some people love their bad habits that much, you know, so they can't really let go of it. So anyway, before I start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a slideshow and then discuss the slides and the thoughts that the slides elicit, that have to do with Sick Chi. Now, just to preface this whole thing, Sick Chi is a name. In Chinese, the word is Bing Chi. Bing means sick, broken. And then there's regular Chi or healthy Chi, feels warm and fluid and feels sort of like electromagnetism. Sick Chi feels cold, needly, prickly, and that's the initial sensation of it, and then it can get into more troublesome feelings, sensations, as it works its way deeper into your body. And the the Western term that can explain this is called interoception. It means the ability to feel inside your body. That is essentially what this can do. When you feel inside, you find out your autonomic nervous system is down there doing all this work, and then you start being able to participate in it, manage it, control it. Then you realize that it's not just you, but you're interacting with your environment, and you go out, and then you start feeling chi outside of your body and how it overlaps. And then you find out just what a complicated little world we live in. And it's a world that the West is completely unaware of. In quantum physics, there's a way to explain this. It's called quantum collapse. So I don't want to, you know, cause anybody's head to explode here by getting too deep. But this is, you can look this up. I mean, it's like basic internet knowledge now, that when you look at something and you see an object, okay, and you just see it as an object, that's called quantum collapse. You've collapsed that thing into an object, but in fact, it's actually made up of energy. And it's just that the energy is arranged in a certain structure to resemble that. And the perfect way to look at this is water. You take water and look at it, and it's got a molecular structure and temperature is related to it. But if you change the temperature of the molecular structure, it turns into ice, turns into a crystal. If you heat it up, it turns into a gas. So all matter, is subject to that. And if you, the awareness of the energetic nature of all matter is really where this leads. And I'm not talking about theoretical physics, which is where, I mean, you can sit there and work out the equations and go, jawohl, it is all energy, but feeling it and is a living phenomenon. And the way that it ties into perhaps even where we came from before we were born and where we go after is another matter altogether. So, Doc, before we embark across, become adrift in the sea of sick chi, go on our adventure, do you have any comments, remarks?
Um, it's at the end of the presentation, you'll have different levels of awareness in your development, and you know, the health is very, very important. You got to have your guardrails on um, with your ethics and spiritual, so that you can venture forward even more. And it's a whole frontier that I'm blessed to have learned from you. I have made huge, huge mistakes. I do have
Me too.
places that I won't go, but it's a really big driver in my health and my mental capacities at this point. And I'm excited to continue to explore that.
Yeah, and we're lucky to have had each other over the years,
Yes.
because we'll go for a couple of years. Well, it hadn't been that way for a while, but we went a couple of years without really talking because I was in such dire straits. And then once I recovered, this is to be discussed later on, folks, not on this episode. Then we reestablished contact. You had then went through your dark night of the soul and
Yep.
we came out of it, and so we stayed in contact. We've been able to compare notes, and we've the adventure continues, as we say. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share a slideshow, and I'm going to eliminate our images from this. Uh, Good, we're not showing up. Let's see, from the beginning. There we go. All right, we're concealed. That's fine. Now, the show begins with this is a picture that was designed by an artist friend of mine who did the illustrations for, I think, all three of my books. He had illustrations in there, but primarily he illustrated everything in my first book, which is really what put me on the map, got me where I am. And he did a bunch of the illustrations on the third book that I did, and he passed away last year, and it's very sad that it happened. But I want to do a show on him, and I'm going to talk to his widow and see if I can't get some of his visionary art. I think he was one of his great disappointments was that he really wanted to be an artist, but like the rest of us who want to be artists, he couldn't make any money, so he had to be a contractor. He was a builder. Very demanding life. And it drove him, I think it hurt him emotionally and shortened his life. But he was a great student to have, and I sketched this out myself. I found the original drawing, gave it to him, and he came up with this. So once you begin to practice, you can feel something like this. And these orbitals that go around the body that emanate from these three centers are something you can really feel. Now, they're very weak, but this is essentially what a healthy chi field looks like, what we right now calling human chi field. Now, I've reinterpreted chi because we can't measure it. I came up with the concept of reflections, which are essentially the echoes that reverberate from uh, the drive of the heartbeat, the movement of fluids throughout the body, neurophysical electricity that's firing through the nerves. All of that combined really could be said to be the source of, at least in part, of what a person feels. Now, the external feeling of energy, I'm not quite sure that it explains that, but it certainly can help explain when you feel the internal part of this, which is that pulse sensation we talked about last time. So the goal, though, is to feel these smooth, beautiful orbitals around these three centers of the body. That's what we start with. And when I was in China, I was introduced to this. And I remember being really startled. It's funny to go back through my journal and see how I wrote about this. And that's really where my entire book came from, that journal that I wrote over there in the late, so 1987 to 1989. But I immediately encountered in my own body a sensation of sick chi because my first experience with this was I was already sick and I felt the pulse and it came up and it destroyed this respiratory infection. And I had pins and needles and prickly, crawly, creepy, crawly sensations all over my skin. I drove the infection out of my internal respiratory tract and it manifested itself in hives and little blisters. What do they call it? Histamine response was what a medical doctor uh, how he put it. But so I felt it in myself, but then my teachers, John and I were talking about last episode, my teacher had me exchanging chi with other humans. Um, with my girlfriend at the time, my wife, Elizabeth Philpott, she and I did that, but we did it with other Chinese people, and I would feel these pins and needle sensations. And the Chinese students that I work with would go, "Yeah, and they would make this noise. They go da da da. They would talk about the sensation in their hands of pins and needles. And so, I didn't know what to make of this. I was just like pins and needle sensation, maybe that, but it was definitely noticeable. Um, and one day I was practicing outside and I was feeling this field right here, and it felt great. I was feeling this warm, sort of watery, electromagnetic sensations in my hands and around my body. And I noticed these Chinese guys were working on a circuit breaker on circuit box, where the power for the building where I lived in was housed. And they took a break. They walked around, went off somewhere and had a cigarette break. And I went up to this electrical box and I put my chi out to it, shot it out of my hand. And when I hit this electrical box, I had a mega sick chi response, very sharp sensation of pins and needles. And I instantly thought of like this theory about power lines causing cancer in people. And I think there's probably something to that. And we're going to get deeper into that. So anyway, during this period of time that I was over there, as I reported before, there was widespread use of Qigong among the students at Beijing University. They were exchanging Qi with each other. This was taking place in all the major cities in China. China is a place that runs on human gossip, and gossip can be back then was, there were very limited communications. It was mostly mouthed, oral communications. It could be writing, um, but there's also just a feeling. The Chinese people are really connected. They're connected racially, and this will all come out later on when we're talking. So anyway, it was spread. Everybody was doing it. I would say in Beijing at that, it was maybe 8 million people in Beijing in the late 80s. Um, over 1 million were doing Qigong. And
Can you
that's
talk
a
about that one episode where you were in Beijing University and then they started doing it and there is like all these people spinning around like spinning tops
yeah. I had a
and they're running into
videotape.
each other and I
Yeah.
mean that
Yeah.
was fascinating.
Mm. So that we'll get to that.
Okay.
Hold that thought. Bring that back up again. When we get to the next slide.
Okay.
I think it's more appropriate for that.
All right.
But anyway, my point is that the authorities that allowed this to go forward started noticing that there were aberrant reactions to Qigong and in these classes in particular. And as John just mentioned, they would actually allow people to go berserk, physically berserk in these classes. And they encouraged it, in fact. They told them that they were getting rid of their sick chi by doing this. But then you started having people doing things like walking around naked in a public park because they said they could absorb the chi better that way. You had people diving off of buildings thinking that they could fly and committing suicide. You had crazy Qigong masters in the South. I remember reading this in the newspaper. This guy persuaded thousands of his followers to drink sewage contaminated water from this river because mythologically this river was supposed to be this place that was rejuvenating. So they drank this sewage contaminated water and like thousands of them died. So this was happening all over the country. So you began to hear this expression, Zohor Rumo, and that means literally translate as 4 words, walk fire, enter devil. Now, putting that into ordinary English, it means if you walk into the fire, you will see the devil. Now, I find it interesting that a communist atheist nation would adopt any expression that had the word devil in it. And we're going to come back to that because I didn't, that didn't escape my notice. And, that's partly my fault. I was brought up Southern Baptist in the deep South, and we see the devil everywhere. I was trained to sort of think that way. So, anyway, the question is like, okay, when you get sick chi, what do you do about it? So, that gets us into now, this is during the second phase of pulsatile's history. Um, this is the unified fitness period, which didn't last long. Well, that's not true. I published the book Unified Fitness in 2001, and it went until I published, yeah. So it went well over a decade. It went 12, 13 years, and then I was able to get research done and then publish Autonomic Intelligence, which is where we are now. So it served its purpose. It was an unfortunate business venture. I had the wrong partners, and because I had the wrong partners who did not really understand what they were getting involved with, it blew up. And I ended up just taking charge of the business myself, and I did okay with it. I got out to Silicon Valley with it. I was able to teach the UVA swim team based on it. But this is what I adapted from what John mentioned. These sessions in China. My teacher had a class of 500 students, and at one point he would have them. He would just basically allow them to go into what he called automatic movement. 自负动 is a Chinese expression where they would go into a trance and then they would do whatever they felt like doing. Some were very gentle and they would put their chi out to other students, but others would flail around and roll around on the floor, scooch along on their butt. They would do all kinds of crazy stuff and it would go on for an hour or more, maybe two, sometimes 2 hours. And then at the end of it, they would all gather around and they would do a Maoist self-criticism, which is they would read, they were encouraged to keep diaries and they would talk about what they felt. And then some of them were allowed to pull out their diary that they had from previous sessions and report what they were feeling. And what I noticed was that a lot of them were complaining about having to live in China. They were saying, like, I'm depressed, I'm sad because I live in this shithole country. I want to get out of here. I want to go to America. And then my teacher would calm them down. He'd go, now, comrades, you have to, that's a foolish thing to focus on. You need to love your country. You need to cultivate your health and help the rest of the country achieve its bright, shining Maoist future. It was all cliches like that. So I never bought into this, but I did learn a style of martial art that my teacher taught called Pigua. And Pigua is also related to a style of martial art called Tongbe, which is when you hit your body. And he would teach us these extra, he actually would go into these, essentially they were training exercises for Tongbe and Pigua, and he applied them to getting rid of sick chi. So I just took that and applied it to the automatic movement phase and used it as a solution and taught it as an exercise. Now, there was still a little bit of a mystical element to it, but I'm going to play this right now. This has a voiceover. This is from a videotape that I might end up releasing on the Pulsatile community right now, which would, give you without buying the book. The book is got its own set of problems. The publisher, which is now dead, the binding came apart. They didn't get adequate glue to hold the book together, so that was problematic with that book. But it was. I'm still quite proud of the book. And then this videotape, which we ended up not being able to release because my partners essentially spontaneously combusted on me. They ended up fighting with each other, and the videographer and the main investor ended up taking their toys and walking away. But I still have inferior, the visual quality is inferior, but I have these tapes and I might make them available. So I'm just going to play this so you can hear. This is a description of what I call rigorous chaos exercise, which was my westernized version of Zifadong.
Rigorous chaos can be quite useful in helping the body tame the effects of infectious or chronic disease. The unified fitness approach to these movements is more structured than many traditional Chinese practitioners would probably like. Unified fitness has effectively turned them into a form of exercise, essentially a kind of aerobic flailing. The purpose of gentle chaos exercise is to help the practitioner sense reflections in the air around the three centers. Rigorous chaos exercise functions differently. Driven largely by rapid gyrations of the waist while bending and straightening the legs at an equally fast pace, these hard chaotic movements are a kind of scattershot acupressure massage aerobic workout rolled into one. An even more effective but painful movement involves rapidly shaking the body from the hips so that the arms are forced out to the sides. As a result of shaking in this manner, your body is likely to seize up with cramps and aches, especially if you are ill, but not necessarily.
All right. So, if you noticed, the camera actually captured a change in color, and it's right around that middle center, right around there. Um, it's less so right there. But when I was hitting myself, you could see the camera capturing the increased heat that's generated in those areas, which I think is probably significant. Um, But at any rate, that's the approach that I came up with, and it works pretty well. Now, I ended up getting injured. If you're injured in the way that I was injured, which is in the lower back, these movements are very difficult and they're too painful really to do. Um, so the but however, I taught this when I taught traditional Qigong in the Three Emperors, we just called it hard movements, but it was essentially the same thing. Now, it had a function under the Three Emperor system that was quite effective. I would make the students do rigorous chaos or what I call rigorous chaos exercise here, or hard movements, um, and then encourage them to flail to the point where they collapsed, where they just didn't have the strength left to go on. And when they did, I would have them lie down and then I would work on them. I would go, and what it did was it tore down their defenses. And I would say it was about 80, 75, 85% effective. Um, but there were big problems that came with this, isn't just pointing back to the original comments, even with this. And it, particularly showed up not just in my school. At least we had a way of dealing with it. Where I really saw it taking effect were in these New Age practitioners. I mentioned the Psi conference in 1990 in the past broadcast, the previous podcast. And there was a character who showed up for me to diagnose, and he was a quote unquote herbalist. And he had studied, I think, 6 months or something like that somewhere in New Jersey to get certified in prescribing Chinese herbs to people. The guy clearly did not know what he was doing. He also did hands-on massage, and when he came to me, I was like, "Oh, what do you want?" He's, "Well, I'm really interested in what you're doing," and I said, "Well, what can I do for you?" And he showed me his hands, and we're talking the insides of his hands, the palms were the most horrific lobster red, cracked, bleeding looking things. It was like the entire, all the skin of his hands, the palms of his hands, the inside of the hands was dead, and he was raw and bleeding. And you know, in Chinese medicine, the hand is key. It's along with genitalia. So the inside of the hand, you can have problems on the outside of your hands because of martial arts, you're hitting and all that. I've got some many problems with my hands on the outside, but the palms should be healthy because that's where your chi is most connected to your. I mean, they're essentially, if you've ever seen this, in the Hindu iconography, and in Buddhism, they'll have the Buddha open his palm or her palm, sometimes female, and there's an eye in the middle of the palm. That pertains to this acupuncture point in the center of the palm called Lao Gong. So the center of the palm is like it's crucial. So if you're that sick, manifesting that level of sickness in your palms, you're really sick. So I tried to tell him this, and he was really hurt by me telling him that he was not only making himself sick, but he was probably making other people sick by putting his sick chi into them under the ruse of, I'm making you well. And he got deeply offended and kind of went to war with me. Spent a number of years trying to undo me. And in addition to him, there were these other New Age practitioners that I encountered. One was the wife of a billionaire. Like at one point, this guy was the richest man in the world. And she had a very sketchy, interesting past, an entire family of German immigrants who came over here. And she was sort of the baby, I think, of the family. She was the youngest out of this group of Germans who came over. Were very involved in the art scene and in UVA at various things. And her distinction was she wanted to be the queen of the New Age healers. And all the women who ran the New Age community iced her out. And I think they probably just resented the fact that she had more money than they did. But her ship came in when she married the richest guy. She married this billionaire, and he funded her because she's a trophy wife. He gave her a ton of money, and she opened her own New Age clinic. And she invited me to attend, and I said, "Sure, I'll join, but I'm not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way." And she got deeply offended, like the other guy, and told me I'd never work in that town again. And there's an entire story that I'm going to come back to on this, and I'm going to preview it real quickly. One of her bodyguards was also my students. So when she decided that she was going to ruin me, she used her money to bring over 100-year-old female Qigong practitioner. She was the head of this system called Wild Goose Qigong. You can Google it. It's a real thing. I'm sure she's passed by now, but she was 100 and very venerable, very respected person. She brought her over, somehow managed to get her out of China and had her yacht dock in the Caribbean in international waters where you didn't have to have passports, had this woman flown by helicopter with her entourage to this yacht, along with, I think, a Hindu guru and a Sikh guru. And she wanted them to get together and mash them together like atoms and something, create a new nuclear new age bomb of chi healing or whatever, system that she could then monetize and spread. It failed horrifically. And it failed primarily because the old Chinese woman took one look at her and just said, "You got too much money and you're full of poison." And that ended it. She threw a tantrum like she did on me, marched to her helicopter and flew away and just abandoned these masters on this yacht. So then the old billionaire had to come in and clean up the mess. And once he got there, things sort of settled down and he played host for a day or so. But anyway, her bodyguard remained on the ship to bodyguard the old man. And he was doing my Qigong system out in the system that I learned from Wang Junhua on the deck of the ship. And he said it was in the early morning. He was doing his movements and he said he sensed that he was being looked at. And he saw this little wizened Chinese face peering around the corner. And she came out with her translator and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm doing Qigong." And she goes, "Where'd you learn it?" And he said, "From this guy, John Alton." And she goes, "Oh, really? Well, what's the name of it?" And he told her the names, Three Emperors. And she said, "What do you feel?" And he described the pulse moving up from his low center into his head. And he said the woman's mouth fell open, soul woman. She said, "That's impossible. You can't know the real thing." And he said, "Yeah, I do." And she goes, "I've never heard of a Westerner that has ever grasped the true depth, real Qigong." So, and that came unsolicited from this bodyguard. He came back and told me this. So, at any rate, this New Age woman went on and eventually became, I think she's now like a certified Buddhist priest. I'm just going to drop her, but she was a nemesis along with this guy with the hands. She was a nemesis that we had to fight against, along with the karate world of Charlottesville was another group of people that we had to kind of fight with.
Mhm.
And there was another group of energy women that had the ones that had iced out the woman who married the billionaire. They continued with their own, essentially a coven, and they were doing energy work. Some of them I had addressed and talked to and warned them about it. But the leader of this group was a beautiful young woman. She was a chiropractor, she and her husband. She developed a really aggressive cancer and died within 6 months. And I remember just seeing, and this is after I'd warned them, and they just kept going. And they're no longer doing it now. In fact, I don't think you could find anyone. You certainly don't find it in the numbers that were going on in the 90s in Charlottesville, Virginia. Um, there, let's see, there was another woman that I trained her husband, and she came to me, and she looked like she had a little pot belly. She's sort of normal looking, so she had like a little gut. And she said that's a cyst. She had developed a cyst on her uterus that was huge. I mean, it was the size of, you know, not quite volleyball, like a small, like one of those little juggling balls, soccer juggling ball, like a small soccer ball, like right there. And I asked her, I said, "Well, why don't you get it cut out?" She said, "It's so involved with my uterus and the blood vessels that are in the uterus that I can't get rid of it. They can't cut it. They think I'll bleed to death." Excuse me. So I tried working on her and I couldn't do anything with her. And what I found out was that she did a lot of energy healing work in Hawaii and got this is where this thing came from. It developed after she did this work. And again, in the genital area, just like with Francis Crispin that we talked about before. Um, so finally, the big learning lesson for me was a good friend of this guy who became my accountant. His wife had uh, bad breast cancer. She had to have a mastectomy. She was really emotionally wounded by that. these were great people, but they were Western to the core and extremely skeptical of what I was doing. I look back on it, I go like, why did they even do it? But I attempted to work on her, and she was resistant, to say the least. She had a scowl on her face the whole time I was putting my chi into her. And afterwards, it wasn't as bad as Francis Crispin, but it lasted longer. This pernicious sick chi got in my body, and the way I felt it was that I just simply couldn't circulate my chi. It was stopping me. I was getting skin eruptions. I was getting respiratory symptoms and that sort of thing. It was so bad that I had to write my teacher. So this is snail mail. I wrote Wong and I said, "Hey, I worked on this sick woman that has cancer and I can't get rid of her sick chi." And this has lasted maybe a month. So within that time, he got a letter back to me pretty quickly. And it said, you need to focus your mind on your sensation inside your body. You have to feel it moving. And at this point, I was really cocky. And so I could feel the pulse and then I could let my mind drift, which is, I think, probably standard for people raised in the West who consumed a lot of media like I did um, and have a rich fantasy life. So I stopped doing that and I focused purely on following the movement of the sensation around the directed patterns, the patterns that had been given to me that I needed to direct my chi along. And the more I mean, it was instant response. It got rid of it. So my point here is that it isn't just physical, even though you do feel physical things. Your mind has to be disciplined and it cannot run away from you. It has to be brought to bear, and that's really hard to do. It's extremely hard to do to stay focused. So this is why you get people who do meditative practices like stare at one thing, and only stare at one thing, and you have to do it for half an hour. The Japanese do this sort of thing in their Zen practices. That's in preparation. That's getting your mind prepared to be able to really direct the interoceptive pulsing sensation that moves around your body that does the real work. All right, now I'm gonna move on. John, do you have any you want to comment?
No.
All right. So one of the things that emerged from this period was that I began to feel that there was a spectrum of sick chi, and at one end of the spectrum you had, lightweight upper respiratory type infections like bad colds, and then you had cancer. And the only difference between them in terms of the sick chi field is the degree and the intensity of it and the invasiveness of it, and the degree to which it could disrupt your own flow. And when you get to cancer and you get to diseases like that, you get major disruptors. Um, so, oh, the other thing I wanted to mention that again point to this, that point to the reality of sick chi is that I had students who would meditate next to each other. And there's one in particular incident that sticks in my mind. It was this attractive young female, and there was a guy in the studio. I liked him a lot, but he was just undisciplined. He was a lascivious person. He just constantly was thinking about sex, and he was bisexual. So it just whoever he was around, it's like he wanted to have sex with him. And did a good job of covering it up, but you could just sense it. You could look in his eyes. There was just a vibe about him that, and the more you knew about him, the more you understood, like, why is this guy so creepy? You kind of understood that. So anyway, this girl didn't know anything about this guy. She sat next to him, and she came up to me after the meditation practice and said, "I don't want you to sit me next to him anymore." And I was like, "Why?" And she goes, "I could feel this like creepy, cold, needly sensation that was coming off of him and coming into me." And I was like, "Okay, well, I won't let you sit next to him," and kind of just wrote it off as a one-off. But then other people, like men who sat next to him, said the same thing. So And then there were others, and I'd already felt it myself, so I knew it was possible. So just all of these things ended up corroborating the reality of sick chi. Um, so now we move on to the next slide. It's like, how do you get, so the hard movements won't do any good unless you have the pulse. So I'm just going to show our audience how you get it. What are the elements of reflective exercise that enable you to um, develop the pulse? So one is if I can get this going, there we go. One is tongue position. Okay. And you can see there's an illustration that's on the website. You can look at this video over and over if you want to. The second is, I can get this going, abdominal breathing. You can see that. You contract on the inhale and then expand on the exhale. So you contract on the inhale while your tongue is in that position and then relax it on the exhale. By the way, the tongue is held in that position. You don't keep moving the tongue like that. And then finally, there's Tai Chi movement. So the Tai Chi movements that I created for reflective exercise are simplifications of Qigong, of traditional Qigong movements, which can be quite complicated. Even though my teachers were, as far as Qigong movements go, were fairly simple, they were still hard. They were harder than the ones that I created for reflective exercise. So you put these elements together, and then you add these features. And in Unified Fitness, we call these exercises gentle chaos exercise. So I can get this going here. But here I just call it reflecting the three centers, working with the reflections, the low center, the middle center, and then the high center. And you feel these energetic sensations, and you do this for a period of time. You don't necessarily have to do those hard movements. And if you do those, you put this together, you will develop, there's like an 80% chance that you'll develop the sensation we call the RFR, reflective response, or the pulsing sensation. In traditional Chinese medicine, they call it opening renmai, which is the um, meridian that runs up and down the front of the body. My teacher called the sensation in the lower abdomen where it starts the yohaiza, have child. So different ways of talking about it. You could also say that this is what the Hindus are all about when they talk about the chakra line. There are seven chakras that run up and down the front of the body. Again, that's a comparative religion kind of question, and my sense is that, in fact, they're all talking about this. And what I'm doing is trying to translate it into Western terms, which is where we are with pulsatile right now. Now, moving on. So, what Pulsatile International is attempted to do is to rebrand Qigong as not only as reflective exercise, but to um, reclassify the effect, because you have lots of different kinds of Qigong. You can go on the internet now and look Qigong, Qigong, Qigong. You're not going to find many, if any, other than what I teach, is talking about this pulse sensation, the reflective response. I mean, I looked. I tried to find them. I tried to find brothers that I could connect to, and I couldn't. So we I took the exercise of Qigong, which is mystical and has lots of problems. The Chinese have actually banned the term and the practice because of Zulhao Rumo and other issues that probably related to Tiananmen. And Falun Gong was 10 years after Tiananmen. You had an organized Qigong riot with 10,000 people in Tiananmen Square, which created the war of the Communist Party against Qigong, and particularly against Falun Gong. So I just stepping out of that by saying that this is a third level of what I call autonomic intelligence, and then putting it together with what we know about And I want to blow this up here so we can take a look. I don't know how to get rid of this bar. Um, it should drop here any second. But um, I classify four levels of autonomic intelligence, which I define as the capacity to create health through sensory awareness of the pulsatile functions of the cardiovascular and immune systems. Okay? So sensory awareness, another word for that would be consciousness. Okay? And I'm being clever here by A with that little um, superscript UI because of AI. Get it? Okay, so it's AUI. AUI is human artificial. It's not artificial. It's autonomic. And but it's our the equivalent. I mean, AUI is to the human being what AI is to science and engineering. We'll just put it that way. Okay, so it supplies the data that's missing. So lots of people have basic autonomic intelligence, and you obtain it by cardiovascular exercise. And it's I map out in the book Autonomic Intelligence how cardiovascular exercise activates the autonomic nervous system. And by the way, the autonomic nervous system is a use or lose phenomenon. So if you sit around all the time and are not activating that autonomic system, autonomic nervous system, it's going to become enfeebled. It has to be worked. That's why exercise is so good for you. And for my money, sustained cardio exercise is going to it activates the whole system. It's not about being able to beat someone up in jujitsu or whatever, or having bigger biceps. It's really about driving that heartbeat and keeping it going and sustaining it. And I have a whole physiological explanation of what it does. Now, intermediate is what's emerged in the 60s and 70s from the New Age movement, where a bunch of hippies got a hold of very superficial information on meditation from the Far East and from the Central East, particularly from India. And then a bunch of them became scientists, and they did what I did. They took the tools of Western science, and they were able to say, "Oh yeah, it has this kind of modest effect, but you know, enough to be noticed effect on calming you down and making you happier, and therefore lengthening your life." But pretty modest in its claims. And then what I'm saying is that no one knows about this third level, which is this advanced level that I'm talking about, where you have high sensory communication between consciousness and the autonomic nervous system. And again, that's when you become pulsatile. You can see these three centers. You become this radiant being where you can sense these things in yourself and in others. However, that gets us to the question, back to the question of what about sick chi? You have to, we have to be honest, that exists. So there's a fourth level that we acknowledge. We don't know anything about. We don't scientifically, we don't know about it. There's some things we know about it. We know that, for example, the Hawthorne placebo effect. I mean, it's possible that if a person believes that a sugar pill that they take is a cure for some disease, that it'll work. I mean, there's evidence of that. There are cases of that. How do you explain that? So that shows that there's something that we have scientifically shown, but we can't explain it. Um, but at least it's known. But then there's unknown unknowns to quote, um, who was it that came up with that? It was, oh my God, Defense Secretary for Bush. It'll come back to me in a minute.
Donald
He was
Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld, yeah. I mean, it's it's so brilliant. It's stupid brilliance. I mean, it just sounds like something dumb, but it's true. Unknown unknowns, things we don't even know, haven't even imagined that we can know about. And I would attribute this to the human imagination. The human imagination, a lot of these New Age women they had incredibly vivid imaginations. Children have vivid imaginations. It is a mental quality that humans have that can allow us to penetrate this unknown fourth level. You don't
Can I
necessarily
add,
have to have the pulse.
can I add something?
Yes.
So, what was profound and game changing for me is that I remember that you kind of said, "Hey, put your fingers here or put your fingers here," and I put that on you, and there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was a like a heartbeat, boom, boom, and you could move it.
Yeah.
You can move this physically palpable pulse throughout your body. And, you had, you know, from your injuries, you had the ability to move it down your legs and heal.
Yeah.
I can move it all the way up in this area, but I didn't. I remember I was so saturated. You said, "Do you want me to teach you how to move it down your leg?" And I was like, "No, I'm good right now." But that's enough for another time. But that's what's profound. It isn't imaginary. You can actually physically feel that.
Yeah.
And the last thing that kind of comes to my mind is that when you were in China, did you come across somebody that actually could move something across the table? Um, that just I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but they just put out their chi and they were able to
Well,
move.
there are people online that you can go online in China. They
Okay,
can burn things. They can burn paper, like set
okay,
paper on fire. So, I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, one of my favorites is Bill Moyers, who I think he's passed away now, but he was this sort of
PBS.
constant presence on PBS, and he was always doing, he was involved. He's a very middle of the road kind of guy,
Hmm.
Mr. Reasonable. And so he did one show. It was called The Mystery of Chi. It was in the early 90s, and I actually saw it at this woman who married the billionaire before I alienated her entirely. She invited me to come over to her house and watch it. And it was with a bunch of other New Age healer people. They didn't know what to make of it. But there was this one Qigong practitioner, fire plug of a man named Shi Ming, and he demonstrated what he could do to Moyers, and Moyers was like completely baffled. This guy would touch one of his students, and the guy would start hopping up and down like he was being electrocuted. It was absurd looking. It just looked silly. And they're just things like that you can see, and that's out there. I actually looked the other day on YouTube. It's there. So you can go look at that video. There's another guy named Dynamo John, John Chang, who is Indonesian.
Hmm.
And there's a movie called, a documentary called Ring of Fire. And it's these Australians, I think they're Australian. They go on this sort of journey, and they're documenting it, and they're looking at the volcanic activity in the Pacific around the East Indies and so on. So they end up stopping off in Indonesia, and one of them gets sick. And they go, "Hey, there's a medicine man up in the jungle here that can heal you up." And they take this guy who has some sort of dysentery, which is what you get when you go over there. And this guy like shot chi into him, and the guy said it felt like he was being electrocuted. And so the cameraman goes, "That's bullshit. I don't believe that." And then the guy who could speak English, his name is John Chang. Chang goes, "Come here." And the guy walks around, so you can see him walk around from his camera, and he touches this guy on the arm. The guy jumps like 10 feet in the air. Not 10 feet, but noticeably jumps. He goes, "Damn, he electrocuted me. It's just like touching a wall socket." So they then go into a long, they're so captivated by this guy, they go into town to his clinic, and he starts trying to explain to him how he does it. And it makes no sense to them. He's talking about his jing. So he's pointing at his groin. He's saying, I'm getting it from there and I'm bringing it up. And they're like, huh? And they're like, and I think the voiceover is he explained to us in some strange way about how, his sexual energy is connected to all this. So he starts showing off to him. And he does like weird martial arts tricks. So he drives a chopstick through the table in front of him with his
Wow.
hands. And a splinter shoots up out of this chopstick and gets in this woman's eye. And he immediately flips out. He goes, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And they're like, "It's okay. It's okay. It's just a splinter. We got it out." He's like, "No, no, I can't face you ever again." And he leaves. And, they gave him a couple of days to like get it together and go back, try to find him. He's gone. And they say, "Where is he?" And there's some, worker out in the street goes, "Oh, he's retreated into the jungle because last night his master came to him. The spirit of his master came to him and says, 'You've broken the rules of the system that I taught you, and you must go pay for it by living in the jungle for 10 years alone.'" So there's so much lore about this that you can look
Yeah.
at. And
But
that
I think
guy's
that,
he's
yeah,
out
just
there.
that, just the palpable, your ability, to put your hand in between your hands and feel that. And then also just putting your hands on someone and feeling that you can move the pulse around your body. And
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And one of the things I used to do is like I'd show it. I'd lie down, I'd let him see I had a pulse in my
Yeah.
lower abdomen. Then I would go, "Now look at my neck," and I could move it up to my neck. I would let him touch the forehead or the top of the head. And then one time I got really brave and I said, "Put your hand on my knee," because this kid had knee injury. And he was like, I can't do Tai Chi. My knee hurts." And I was like, "Feel that." And I really put it down there on my knee and he felt it. So I, John and I were talking prior to the podcast. I have sustained a knee injury a couple of years ago skiing that really, I thought I was done. I was not going to be able to do hard martial arts. It was even hard for me to do Tai Chi. And, I went to see an orthopedist and like, "Oh, you need a knee replacement." And, I can explain later why I would reject something like that. But I just put my chi down there for 3 or 4 months and I got back like 7/8. I'm about 7/8. That may be too much. 6/8 of what I had before. And I was almost to the point where I could turn a flip. And I was 70, 60.
Wow.
I was late 60s, 69.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not even going to attempt that now, but I can do a leaping crescent kick and stick it with one leg, land on one leg as I did back in the day. And I'm 72 and can do that with the injuries that I have, which we're not even going to go into today. But that knee injury, I didn't think I was going to come back from, but I was able to come back from it. So it is truly remarkable. I don't want to get too wrapped around the axle of this fourth level, but I do want
Okay.
to acknowledge that it's there. Now, the reason why is that where pulsatile is going at some point is that there is a plausible Western physical theory that is theoretically sound. It's just there's not very much data on it. There's no money in it that we know of. Who knows? People like DARPA and the Chinese military are probably studying it. In fact, I'm sure they are. But it's called torsion fields, and torsion is the Latin means twist. So theoretically, it's a property of an energetic property of matter that stems from the fact that everything's made up of atoms and spinning electrons. So the electrons are spinning, they're spinning around the atom. Theoretically, that would produce a force. And if you think of all the matter in the universe organized into objects, substances, uh, whatever, even energy, like plasma coming off of the sun, heat energy. All of that involves particles, all of that involves atoms, and that means the electrons are spinning and producing energy. The problem with torsion energy, theoretically, you would think it's there. Einstein acknowledged it. There have been several others that have put together models that explain that, come up with it. There are a lot of people, new age people have sort of gotten onto this. Um, but theoretically, if it's, the theory is that if it's real, it would be everywhere. So, in other words, we are immersed in an energetic field that stretches from one end of the cosmos to the other. theoretically, if your consciousness could touch this field, you could go anywhere. You could leave your body. You could go to one end of the universe. You could go into another dimension. You could penetrate another person. You could penetrate an object. And by the way, traditional Chinese practitioners of this believe they can input chi into an object, and that's, energetic spirits can inhabit something like a dagger and live in it. So if you go up and look Dynamo John, if you look him up, he's actually working with, and it shows him like putting his chi into an object that he thinks is possessed. So I mean, this is stuff in the Middle Ages that people believed. So anyway, this theory could possibly explain it, and I've been directed to a doctor in Taiwan who's come up with a credible theory that, and this ties us together, ties pulsatile with him, and that he thinks that the shock waves produced by the heart create force lines. Your body is a medium, so your heart is producing this shock, and then it radiates throughout your extremities, throughout your entire body, up into your head. And he says he has evidence that those force lines, those shock wave lines, correspond to the acupuncture meridians. And he believes that over because it's continuous, your heart is always beating, your heart is always activating those channels, and of course your heartbeat is inconsistent sometimes. And if you have heart disease, then your meridians are going to break down. But those meridians are there as lines of force, and that torsion energy collects over time along those force lines, and that is what acupuncture meridians are. It's not blood, it's not nerves, it's these force lines, which ties us back to reflections. It ties us back to the autonomic intelligence model and the model of the third, more advanced level. So we're approaching the end of the line here. So the question is, all right, this is Pulsatile's approach to wrangling all of this, from the health, the basic health issue, to even to the fourth level. And again, that is a work in progress. The third level, I think we've got down, and we can get that to people. So the question is, like, what's this mean for the average person who might be interested in this? Well, we're trying right now to create a social network, and through that social network to help customers to develop. And we call it the Pulsatile community. It's on the web page. Right now, it's just full of YouTube videos that people can look at and comment on if they want to. It's going to grow as we grow, and hopefully it will. But as you can see, it's a conic shape right here. So we start with a big net. We try to get as many people in as we can to at least become aware, to develop that first level of autonomic intelligence where you're just aware that your health depends on your autonomic nervous system, and primarily through your cardio and immune systems, which are the main ways that we experience it through reflective exercise. So people who learn that first level, there can be quite a number of people who try to get it, but it is self-selecting. So there are going to be people who can't get it, and that's fine. They can go find other things, but so we're not going to catch everyone who falls into the net, but we're going to get a significant number, and that may take them into the level two, where they learn to circulate this sensation, this interoceptive sensation, up the back and down the front. We call it back to front circulation. In the old Chinese parlance, it's called Xiaojiutian, which translates as small universe. And there's going to be a video and some basic techniques that I will probably supply for people to achieve the second level. And then when you get down to third level, that's where you get full body circulation, where you can get to something like an extremity, like an ankle or a knee, that's really hard to get to. You have to have really strong first and second level. You have to be committed to everyday practice. You can't not practice and get to third level. It has to be, you got to be in every day. And that is, again, self-eliminating. I mean, there are going to be people that just go, no, I want to go drink beer. I want to go play video games. I want to go shoot guns. I want to practice archery. I just want to sit around and watch television. I mean, there's just going to be people that can't, that are not willing to make the time. It's just not there. But the people who get to third level are going to be the ones that we will say, you're made of the right substance to be an instructor if you want to be. You want to pass it along. And that gets us to why are you here? And that gets you to this level four, which is when you get an emergence of paranormal abilities. And they will emerge. If you get to this third level, you're going to have experiences that you can ignore them if you want to. You don't have to participate in anything paranormal that comes along. But you need, as John said earlier, spiritual guardrails, spiritual intellectual guardrails. So that gets us to, okay, well, so that's the plan. How do we get there? Um, this takes us to the final slide. So this is instructor training. So the method, let's see if I can get big enough here. The original method that was imparted to me by Wang Junhua, and this is grounded in Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist traditions, is that you had to believe, first of all. You don't, if someone comes in and goes, I don't know whether I believe in this or not, they're dead in the water. Forget it. You have to have a person, and see, for a Western mind that thinks it's smart to be skeptical, you can see how that's a non-starter. But I would point out that the character for belief, and the way you say it in Chinese is xin, the character is the character for heart, which takes us back to the importance of heart in what we've uncovered in our research, and what we've uncovered in our experiential experience, that it's vascular, that it's heartbeat, that it's somehow cardio related, um, and immune related. And the fact that belief in the physical heart are being kind of highlighted to me is significant. Now, the other thing that he said you had to have was character. Now, this is a deep well right here, because how do you get character? What he means by that, the character chung, I think was the term, chung, means sincerity. It means someone that isn't harboring an ulterior motive, someone who is self-honest, who can look honestly and go, I mean, to put it in Christian terms, I am a sinner. What are my faults? Am I addressing my faults? Is it possible that I'm overlooking my faults? This gets us into, and at one point, I'm going to be bringing in people who advise uh, people on a geostrategic level. These are policymakers. They're involved in the U.S. government, involved in world governments, that are involved in big business. That really is, it's there. There's an approach to these things that's called net assessment. Net assessment means admitting your biases and trying to set them aside. That's somewhat related to, and I have to say, the people who are masters of net assessment are of an impeccable character that I've met. So, but it's the rare person that can do that. So I'll just chew. I don't mean to pick on the new age people, but there were a lot of people that were in that New Age community that had ulterior motives. They wanted to be powerful. They wanted to be looked up to and admired for something. And it wasn't just helping others. They were trying to be self-important, and it blew up in their faces. And I would have to say that I suffered from that as well. Um, the other thing, the other two qualities are, let's see if I can get a little bigger here, devout practice and manifest results. Now that's training. If you don't do the practice, you're not going to get results. So you got physical training on the one side, then you have the mental on the other side. You have to have an open heart, an open mind. You have to be honest. You have to be sincere. You can't sit there and play games and I'm going to learn this and then everyone's going to be. And I have to say, that contaminated some of what I was up to. And I think I paid a price for it as well. So when we translate this into a Western sphere, what we're really talking about here is education. That's really where your character is formed, and then physical training. So On the education side, essentially we're talking about discipline. I came up with, like a typical American, I'm always trying to come up with slogans and quick uh, symbolic references. I came up with and I also like math a lot. Came up with the expression R cubed, the three R's, the R cubed methodology, which is restrict, repeat, refine. Now, I developed this based on writing theory, and I was a writing teacher, and I got it straight from Aristotle and from people who tried to imitate him and from doing it myself. So the art of writing is a lot like the art of everything else. Um, it is a matter of discipline. You restrict yourself to one goal-oriented behavior. You repeat that over and over again to the exclusion of other behaviors and other goals. And in doing so, you refine. You become that goal becomes sharper in terms of its achievement, and it becomes more effective. And that's just how it becomes a virtuous cycle. If you just do the three R's, R cubed. Now, the qualities in this discipline on the education side that I think we're down to character and all those four qualities in the original requirements are really one. Um, but the things that you should have in order to be a teacher is you have to be well spoken. You have to have the words, the language, the vocabulary for talking about what you're talking. You also have to know what you're talking about. You can't not understand the autonomic nervous system if you're going to teach autonomic intelligence. You have to know it, which means you got to read the books. You also have to recognize who you're dealing with, your audience. You have to empathize with them. There are going to be people that just are nowhere near ready to hear this. There may be people that are ready. And if you don't have good empathic skills where you're paying attention to who you're talking to and feeling them, and then John can address this. This is a little bit like playing a tennis match against someone
or teaching a group tennis lesson.
or what?
If I teach a group tennis lesson,
Yeah, teaching tennis lessons.
I use my
Exactly. Exactly.
intuition and try to speak at the level that people are actually able to hear. And you can tell by their body language, after 10 seconds, they put their hands on their hip or they're looking around. You got to keep people busy because their attention spans are very limited these days.
But on an energetic level, do you think you can sense what's
Oh
going on
yeah,
with them?
I do, and I try not to use it that much because
Yeah, you
I
don't want
don't
to
I
invade
don't
them.
want a direct transmission with a lot of my students, but yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And
And especially,
my only
well,
protection when I'm on a tennis lesson is I try to repeat these two things. How can I serve the people in front of me to the best of my ability? What can I contribute? It's not about a personal thing.
yeah.
Now, if if there's a student that just is stuck in their thinking in their ways, I'll go, I'm not the instructor for you. I don't want you to waste your money. There's, you know, that guy over there, you can go to him. He'll repeat all the stuff that blah blah blah, or you can look on the internet and there's people doing really weird things and they probably can't do it themselves. So I've changed my teaching approach entirely the last 3 years because the game of tennis, if you view it on television, has totally changed in the last 3 years. If I taught the same step in, follow through, all that stuff, um, I'd be irrelevant and I would not be contributing to these people's success going forward. So I have to relearn some of these things, just like life,
Yeah.
different
So
stages of life.
all right, we can come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot you can say about how this applies not just to this practice. Right now, we're talking about what's going to make an instructor. What are we looking
Okay.
for?
Yeah.
So humility, recognizing your limits. That is where I completely fell on my face. And then the authority. You don't have authority if you don't have these four things working for you. And if you're not doing the three R's, you have no authority. So if you're not practicing every day, if you're not paying attention and you're not learning from it, and you haven't put uh, skin in the game where you really sat down and made an earnest effort to learn the material, you have no authority. So you shouldn't be teaching. And if that's fine, if you don't want to do that, that's great. But this is what it's going to take. And so what I want to do is have a school. When I say school, that's just a convenient term because this is a digital platform. Eventually, we're going to have a physical place, though. But digitally, we can handle this where people are learning to write, learning to speak. They can demonstrate this through their writing, through making a video of themselves, and they have to read. They've got to demonstrate that they can read and understand the materials that we want them to teach. And that gets us to the requirements here, which I want to talk about just briefly. Of course, you have to do level one, which means you got to read the book and you have to prove that you can achieve the pulse by the app. The app is a really down and dirty. I mean, it was hell to try to get that app done. Um, but thanks to the researchers that I work with, I was able to kind of get the ideas and then give it to software engineers who they're all looking like how can I capitalize on biotech? So I found a couple of hungry young grad students who put it together. And then now with AI, I'm able to upgrade it. So we just put an upgraded version up on Google Play and it works. I tested it out. Um, Very happy with it. So if you can produce a signal and pass the test that we give you. Um, you got to show level two, and level two I think is going to be interesting. If we get the right resources, I think we can demonstrate the ability to move spinal fluid and move it up the back and up into the head. And that was something I was working on pre-COVID to try to prove, and I had to kind of mothball that because of COVID, and it involved me running around chasing investment. Which this is not something that Western investors are going to get. So I've just stopped trying to do that altogether. I don't really want Western investors because they don't. I've before all the other efforts that I've made, um, unless they were practitioners and they were students, they didn't get it. And I want to say right here that John Dokken has been an essential anchor investor from the very beginning, and he supported me with what he can, but he's also got to have his own life. Whereas a venture capitalist, they've got who knows what they do with their time. But it's not going to be doing. Essentially, they would have to do fall under my control, which they're not going to do. I've already had that problem with one of the doctors that was involved with us, and I could tell that he couldn't do that. It would mean subordinating himself to me and these ideas, and he couldn't do it. So level two is right now we can prove level one, level two. There it might be iffier, but there are probably some questions that I can ask just straight up to determine whether or not. But I'm hoping to have the technology to be able to manifest movement of spinal fluid up into the top of the head. Now, we've already done research. Another of my anchor investors has done research to show that it is possible to study the flow of lymph. Um, and I don't know whether lymph is the proper term. Yeah, it is lymph. And then it becomes the glymphatic system once it gets up in the brain. But he studied it and he showed that it is possible. So all we really need to do is just get someone to put me or another one of my students in an MRI machine and prove it, that we can increase flow. If you can increase flow through these micro vessels that are up in the top of the head, that's proof that you have the power to control whether or not you get brain-related age disease. I'm sorry, age age-related brain disease. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, those kinds of things. If you can control flow, that air and demonstrate it, increase flow at will, you have control over whether or not you develop Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. This is huge. So anyway, there are other issues as well, brain trauma, being able to recover from that. Now, another possibility, which I think is going on in China, is that there's a possible genomic marker for whether or not a person should be a teacher. And this gets to it's considered pseudoscience if you Google it, but I don't think it is. This is an experiment. The experiment is called the phantom DNA effect, and you can Google that. You can look it up. A group of Russians got together, and I believe this was after the Chinese demonstrated chi to them. And the Russians went back and went, "Well, we're going to figure this out scientifically." So they took a Faraday chamber, which is a structure that blocks out all electromagnetic energy. So nothing's going on inside of it. They sterilized the inside of this thing, and it was glass. So you could see inside, and it had a top and a bottom. It was a tall cylinder. And at the top, they put nanoparticles that were, I think they were iron filaments. So iron is really responsive to electromagnetic energy. So they dropped these nanoparticles down this cylinder and just observed them. And there was no consistent pattern at all. They just made random kind of shapes or non-shapes. So then they fired a laser through while they dropped these filaments. And the laser, had some effect, but it was all kind of inconsistent and no real shape or structure to it. Then they put human DNA in a petri dish at the bottom of this cylinder, dropped the filaments, fired the laser, and the filaments immediately went into these elaborate, gorgeous spirals, which is the spiral is the torsion, suggesting that genes, the human gene, human matter has energy at the genomic level, at the gene level. We radiate some sort of energy that is of another world. We don't know what it is, but I would refer people to that. Look up phantom DNA effect, and you'll see that. And then I have, my experience is that I could fold a piece of paper and project my chi at it and move it. If someone can do that, I think that qualifies them. If you can put a person on one side of a wall and then on the other side, I did this. I had a person, a female, get on one side of a wall, and I got on the other side, and I had a person stand in the doorway so you could see both sides. And then I made sure that this person did not know when I was going to project my chi, but the observer was watching. And I projected my chi through the wall. And as soon as I did, this woman on the other side goes, "I felt it. I can feel it." And the guy at the door, like acknowledged, the simultaneity of it. So if you can do that, that's something I would consider to be a marker for a person who's qualifiable. And the other is the ability to project your chi and to evoke emotion in a person, which is somewhat dangerous. But this happened to me in the initial stages of the Three Emperors when I was putting chi into people as just a matter of course. That's how I taught. And I remember this one really troublesome student that we had. Doc will remember this because I sick Doc on the student at one point because he was so troublesome, but his wife, and I was projecting chi into her kidneys and she started crying. And not bawling, but just tears formed in her eyes and fell down. And I noticed it. And afterwards I said, "What did you feel?" And she said, "I just felt joy, like this deep joy," which is exactly what John and I have both described feeling when we felt the pulse. And that gets us back to what we talked about last week was this form of Qigong they call Zhineng, which is innate intelligence, innate ability, which is interoception and the ability to feel the pulse. So let me shrink this back down here. So again, the three R, the R cubed is how you get this. There's a reading list. And again, this is a work in progress. These are just five books that I gained a lot from, and I think people could, so that we're all on the same, reading from the same sheet of music, could read these books. There may be others. And once they read these books, they'll have a richer way to communicate to people and be able to see people embedded within larger systems, so that they'll have better empathy for who they're dealing with. And then if you do all these things, you can get certified, and the cost of this would be something like half a course load semester at a community college. And again, this is for people in the West. I do have people in the East, in Sri Lanka, possibly in Japan, possibly Singapore. Mainland China is probably going to be difficult to do just because of the government. But in the future, if things thaw between China and the U.S., it may be possible, if we can get out of this adversarial relationship. It could be the Middle East, Europe, certainly. But the idea is to put these um, beta sites, to have these places in native areas where a selective group of people who pass the muster are trained, and then they go out and spread their pulsatility, their autonomic intelligence, and they are supported by us. They're backed by us. If they fall on hard times, we can swoop in and give them support or counsel them out of it if they have to do so. Um, but that's the grand scheme of how we plan to deal with the sick chi. Um, now let me get out of this now and go back. I'm trying to stop sharing here. Stop. Uh, Stop. Let's see if I can get it to go now.
Yep.
I'm afraid if I X out of this that, oh, there you are. Where are you? All right, we're out. Well, I hope that was edifying for everyone. Doc, any thoughts occur to you before we check out?
No, I just really enthusiastic about being able to possibly have other people experience what I've been so fortunate to feel through your teaching.
Yeah, and safely, because when
Yes,
we first did it, it was not that safe, and we were naive about it. And
yes, and being
fortunately,
older and having more experience really counts.
yeah, well, we had to learn the hard way. We got beat
Yes, we
up.
did.
Both of us got beat up pretty bad, and
Yes. We both, the one thing that I will add is that we did really rise up, but we've both been through some major tests. I went over that cliff 660 feet. You've had numerous surgeries. Um, and we've gotten to this point, and that's why I think having some lived a little longer and having a little experience, and then still having this knowledge and having our, knock on wood, still having some of our health, it's such a blessing.
yeah. Well, and I think back, it just seems like yesterday that I was in China. And I remember meeting this old man in the park. And this is when I was first starting. I don't even think I had met Wong yet. There were like six different Qigong guys I practiced with, that were, brought to me. And, so I was like trying to mix in. But at this point, I actually was thinking of defecting to China. This is how crazy I was.
Wow.
Liberal college professor that I was. So I was walking in the park and I was trying to, the anxiety level that I was feeling, because I was the only non-Chinese person then. They
Hmm.
were very restrictive. No one wanted to go to China back then. It was horrible. And I was walking around, and this old man came walking up, and he was like, speaking Chinese, and he had that sort of Mao bearing, had his hands behind his back, and he was
Mm.
sort of looking at me like that, and he had a translator with him. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm trying to, understand China, and I'm here to learn Chinese medicine and Qigong." And the guy translated, and he goes, "You have to practice twice a day." This is the first thing he said to me. Have practice twice a day, minimum. And he said, "Don't give up and persist." And he hit the nail on the head with that one. And it's the persistence that I think has distinguished us. Um, and, Wong told me that he chose me to, he and I had a falling out. I'll end up talking about that later on. But he thought that I was the right person to bring this to the West because because I had a powerful response and I acknowledged it. He said, when you had your response, you were really happy and joyful. He says, that's how I know. Same with you.
Yeah.
And I went, this is the guy, and then I had others who were like, well, that's okay, but I think I'm going to go to the brain balancer, next door, or, I really want to do it like a leaping spin kick to someone's face. And that, when I encountered that sort of thing, or uh, any number of just dismissive responses. I remember the husband of this woman that I made cry. One of the things that annoyed me the most was that I was like, it's a pulse. And he goes, no, I wouldn't say that if I were you. Like he just immediately wanted to get in the way. And, and then I was like, okay, this guy's going to be trouble. And sure enough, as the weeks went by, he just invited more and more trouble. And I thought back to, again, going back, I'll close with this, Vince Black, whom I mentioned last time, who is the super badass guy that I first learned Qigong from and traditional Chinese medicine. He told me that one of his teachers, and this is one of the most ferocious martial artists in history, in modern history anyway, who founded a system in Hawaii called Kaji Kimbo. Imperato, I think is the guy's name. Imperato. I'm not sure. My memory's vague on how it's spelled. But he said that that teacher, when he spotted anyone that had any kind of troublesome symptom, he would chase them off. And he said he would just go up, like he would throw something at the student's foot and at his feet and go, "You threw that on the floor. Pick it up." And the guy would, "No, I didn't. I didn't pick it up." He says, "Yes, you did. Pick it up." And he would just do that and to run him off, and that stuck with me. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't have the guts to do that to someone. But then after this guy, I was like, maybe I should have done that to him. I had you sit him down and brace him. And that was an experience. And we kicked him out. And what we're talking about, this guy was like a pillar of the community too. He was well respected, rich, and he came crawling back 2 or 3 weeks later. And I got to tell you, okay, so 40 years, how long? 30 something years later, um, I get this Facebook message from him saying, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you for teaching me." You know,
Nice.
that was
Nice.
nice. It was nice. And we're
That's
we're
very nice.
both old men now. I mean, he's really old. He's 10 years older than me. I'm not sure 10, somewhere between 8 and 10 years. He's pushing 80.
Wow.
So it's really nice to hear that from him. He's still alive too. All right, brother, what about
All right.
show this thing that you got there? You got this
So
IG ruler. Yeah.
this is something my father made for me when this is just before I met John, or actually, I think it's right as I met John. And called a Taiji ruler. So if you meditate and you do your movements, that's then kind of going between your hands, and then there's energy in this. And my
And if
thought
he
was,
made it in a wood shop or something?
yeah, in his wood shop. Yeah, and it has, to John from Dad 1989 on here. And my dog chewed on it a little bit. But my hope is that I continue to meditate with this, and then I'll give it to my son and the children that he has. It'll just be put in their crib, and that
That's
way I'm with,
great.
and that
So
way
we got to
my
market.
energy's with them.
We
What
have
was
to
that?
market that. We have to market that.
Yeah, we'll mark it.
We got
Well,
to
there's
sell it.
another.
I've never heard of it. Never
Yeah,
heard of such a thing.
yeah. So
Did he
it's
just make that up, or did he see it somewhere?
I don't know. He might have been very curious about what I was doing and read up on it at that time.
Mm.
And he said, "Oh, a Taiji ruler, I can make that in the shop and give it." So he's kind of part of it.
Wow. So he just off the top of his head.
Yeah. So I think,
That's
you know,
cool.
I
That's
I
cool.
remember him all the time with by doing this, and then my energy's in this, and then it
That's
goes
kind of, and
goes to the next
somewhat,
generation.
well, when you do it, it does feel like you have a stick between your
Yeah.
palms. Feels like something's there. Yeah.
Well, remember, if you're like people are going, "Oh, is this real?" And they say, "Put your hand here," and you put your hands like this, and you do this, and they're going, "Wow, I can you feel that?" And it's like a
Yeah.
something being pushed into their
Like,
hand.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's all being stored in here.
Yeah. That is really cool. So
Yeah,
objects, your
yeah,
torsion energy is stored in
yeah,
there. All right, Doc, listen, this has been great. Thanks
yep.
everyone
Thank
for
you.
indulging this conversation. And I'm sure, Doc, you'll come back again. The next time I'm on here, I'm either going to be by myself or I'll have someone else. It's tough to line people up and get them to devote the time. As you can see, this took quite a while, but I think it was well worth it. So join us next time for